Greetings everyone, Jera here at Antioch Baptist Church, Rochester, Indiana, where I'm a youth leader, not a youth pastor. I'm a teacher, not a preacher. There's a difference. If you don't know the difference, that's fine. It just means those titles don't mean anything to you, but I say it in case those titles do mean something to you. I teach 6th, 7th, and 8th grade Sunday school, and today we're going to continue in Psalm 1, which we've been on the last few weeks here. We covered a verse each week, and this week we're going to be covering verse 4 with a brief review of verses 1, 2, and 3. Starting in verse 1, "Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful." Blessed, of course, means happy. And a person is happy when they don't walk in the counsel of the ungodly. Now, the counsel of the ungodly would be counsel or advice that is ungodly. It means that God says, this is what is truth, this is what's right. And somebody else says, no, that's not what it really says. It really means this. They'll say something, their philosophy, their ideas are the opposite of what God says. God says, this is right, and they go, no, that's narrow-minded, that's not right. And God says, this is wrong, and they go, no, that's okay, there's nothing wrong with that. That's ungodly, that's the counsel of the ungodly. And it continues and it says, nor standeth in the way of sinners. That means you don't stand around hanging out with sinners while they're committing their sins. Because even if you don't participate, you're guilty by association. You're not preventing them from doing it, you're just standing around while they do it, so you're no better than they are. You're not stopping them from doing it. So, and then it says, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. If you're sitting in a seat in Congress, that means you have a seat in Congress. You are a member of Congress. So if you're sitting in the seat of the scornful, you are the scornful. And a person is blessed when they don't do that. Verse number 2, but his delight is in the law of the Lord. His, being the blessed man, the godly man, his delight, his happiness, his entertainment is in the law of the Lord, which is the Bible, God's word. And in his word does he meditate day and night. So the happy man, the blessed man, he takes delight in reading God's word. It brings him joy and happiness to read God's word. And he meditates, he studies God's word day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. So God here is comparing that godly man, a happy man, to a tree planted by river, which I went over in great detail last week. A tree that is planted by a river, a flowing water source, is much more fruitful, much more productive, much larger, much greener than a tree that is not planted by water. So God is comparing a godly man, a happy man, to a tree that is planted by water. So a godly man is going to be very prosperous and very happy. And then verse 4, our text for today, the ungodly are not so, but are like the chaff which the wind driveth away. Now, the ungodly, as I mentioned in verse 1, the counsel of the ungodly would be ungodly counsel. Counsel that is the opposite of what God says. So an ungodly or an ungodly person would be a person who has ungodly advice, ungodly ideas, ungodly philosophy. Now, this person can be straight up overtly wicked. They rebel for the sake of rebellion. They argue for the sake of argument. They'll say the sky is green if you say it's blue. They just totally wicked people. They'll say what they want. They do what they want. They don't care about authority. They don't care about anything. Or an ungodly person can be the nicest person on earth and still have really bad ideas. Even if they're a really good person, if they're a really nice person, well, my lights just flickered. Even if they're a really nice person and they seem to do everything right and everybody seems to like them, they get along with everybody, they're just easygoing, they never argue about anything, but their ideas are flawed. God says this is wrong and they say, no, there's nothing wrong with that. Well, that's ungodly. Therefore, they're an ungodly person because they have ungodly ideas. God will say, this is the right thing to do. And they say, no, you can't do that. That's narrow-minded. Again, that's ungodly. So even if they're the nicest person in the world, if their philosophy is flawed, it's still ungodly. And it says the ungodly are not so. So what? What are they not? The ungodly are not like the tree planted by the rivers of water. The ungodly are not going to prosper and be blessed like the godly person is. So as God has compared the godly person to a tree that is planted by water, God has compared the ungodly person to the chaff, which the wind driveth away. Now, what is chaff? Chaff is, well, here in Indiana, we have another word for it. In Indiana, we eat popcorn, Orville Redenbacher. Gotta love that stuff. And those little pieces that are in the middle of the popcorn, you know, a popcorn pops and it's now inside out. You get the white fluffy stuff on the outside and this little kernel-like thing on the inside that gets stuck in your teeth. That's the hull. That's the hull of the popcorn. That hull in the biblical times, in the Old English, that's chaff. All grain, corn, whether it's wheat or corn or whatever the grain is, it has this light, really thin layer on the outside of the seed or the outside of the kernel, and that's called the chaff. Now, they didn't have combines back in the biblical days, so they had to thresh the corn or the wheat or whatever the grain is in order to harvest it. So what they'd do is they'd take the corn stalks or the wheat stalks out, and they'd beat them, and they'd take their sickles, you know, those round-shaped blades that they have, and they'd beat the corn with those, and it would chop up the stalks, and it would chop the husk off the corn if it's corn, and all of that stuff falls to the floor, the threshing ground floor, and it'll also beat the husk off the corn, and it'll beat the little chaff, that little outer coating of the seed of the corn kernel. It'll beat those off of the corn and off of the wheat. And it's so lightweight, it becomes like, it beats it like dust, and it just flies off in the wind. The chaff is also kind of like if you're out in the country and you see a combine out during harvest season, September, October, around that time of year, and you see like this cloud of dust following the combine, that's the chaff that the wind drives away. So God is comparing the ungodly, the people with the ungodly ideas, the ungodly philosophy, to the chaff that's just driven away by the wind. It's good for nothing. You know, the corn falls to the floor, the stalks, the husk, the solid stuff falls to the floor. The chaff becomes like dust, and it just gets driven away in the wind. So the godly person is prosperous and very fruitful and very happy, and the ungodly person just drifts off with the wind. So that is our lesson today. It was a very short lesson. We had a very short verse. Next week we will continue, Lord willing. God might change my mind before then. But Lord willing, we will do verse 5 next week, which is, the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. And we'll learn what that means next week. See you then.